Okay, here we are today at the most important park in Leander. Why is it the most important park in Leander? Well, it's where we play soccer. So, it's Robin Bledsoe Park. It's great. It has a basketball court, it has turf fields, which I promise you are for soccer, not some other inappropriate sport that sometimes people play here. It also has an amphitheater, has a playground, and you can see, yeah, there's my sign. So there you go. I like this place. I spend a lot of time here, and it's like a great place to come and talk to you about Bill Clinton. Oh, there's a rock down there. So, all right. So Bill Clinton was elected in a surprising kind of way, I suppose. At least surprising to George Bush because his popularity was so high. I think we talked about that last time. And the Clinton presidency. It's pretty interesting, pretty diverse. Sorry, looking at my notes there. So, Bill Clinton is elected in the 1992 election. So that means he takes office in 93. And he has an economy slightly on the decline. We have kind of a weird middle class recession. They called it the dot-com recession. It's also around the time I graduated from. No, it's not when I. Yeah, no, it's around when I was trying to get a job, and ended up. Oh my gosh, getting a job in Leander ISD. It was life changing, because the three before that were not exciting. But the economy was a little soft, and life was a little challenging. But we had Bill Clinton as president. Here's some reasons we like Bill Clinton. One, he's young. Two, he's kind of interesting. And three, he's a really good speaker. Really, really good speaker, and especially good after Bush, who was not very good. And his son inherited that lack of ability in that area as well. Okay, but here's what we need to know about Clinton. Part of the reason he gets elected is Ross Perot and the economy. And he's a pretty good candidate. He's younger, he's a little more entertaining, he goes on TV talk shows. I remember watching him on Arsenio Hall show, and they asked him if, yeah, they asked him about his underwear, and he answered. He also played saxophone, which people thought was cool. That is cool. My older brother Jim plays saxophone. He's really good. He probably would not talk to you about his underwear or be president. He is married to a professional woman, Hillary Rodham Clinton, who was a pretty well regarded lawyer in their area and certainly had good academic credentials, as did Bill Clinton, both very smart people. And they had a cute kid, Chelsea Clinton, and we like it when the president has little kids. It's kind of fun. Um, and he was an interesting guy. The Republicans had turned fairly conservative, as you guys know, moral majority. We are not in favor of certain alternative lifestyle type issues. So, after a speech at the Republican Party convention, nominating convention for Bush, with, oh gosh, the guy from the 700 Club, I'll think of his name in a second. He gives a speech. It's a big TV church show. Goodness, I should have written it down. But he talks about how the Republican Party is focused on opposing abortion and being against gays and gay marriage, that sort of stuff. Clinton takes a much more moderate term or tone socially. So he's socially liberal and fiscally conservative. He's from Arkansas, or he is from Arkansas, and he'd been the governor of Arkansas. And that's a fairly conservative place. Oh, people are at the park and they're honking. So sorry. But that's a fairly conservative place, so you would expect him to be fairly conservative, but he is socially liberal. He's a little younger, so he's going to do some interesting things. But he's going to be conservative enough that people from the middle of the country and the South will be okay voting for him. And you may have noticed politically, the middle of the country and the South is a little more conservative than either coast. Have you noticed that? It is true. Or Austin, which is different as well. Okay. So, Clinton, socially liberal, fiscally conservative, and probably addressed a concern within the Republican Party that they had maybe moved a little too far to the right. So, um, he did follow through on a lot of his promises to be a little more socially liberal fiscally conservative. With his Supreme Court appointments and his cabinet appointments, he's going to appoint a fairly diverse cabinet. Those are the advisors to the president, as you recall. He appoints the first female Attorney General, Janet Reno. She was funny too. I'm telling you, Saturday Night Live was pretty good during that time period, and she occasionally later on would appear on there. But she's also going to be in charge of that raid at Waco, which maybe wasn't her high point, and also an issue in Florida with a little kid who was an immigrant from Cuba, and oh my goodness, that was tricky. But anyway, okay. But overall, she's an interesting person and an interesting appointment. He also appoints Judges Breyer and Ginsburg to the Supreme Court, and those guys are definitely more in the liberal than conservative mode. And you probably know the most about Ginsburg. She's really a champion for women's rights, so she's a very interesting, solid intellectual appointment, as was Justice Breyer. He implements the Don't Ask, Don't Tell program within the military. Before, if you were openly gay, you could not serve in the military, and this is an adjustment of that policy, which essentially says nobody cares. We're not going to ask you, and don't tell us. So it's not, it's not moving all the way out to we don't care who you are or who you love. We're going to also insure your family, that sort of thing, and let you get married. Not quite there, but a movement away from we'll kick you out if we find out you're gay. So that's progress. He's going to raise taxes on the wealthy, and he promised that, so it wasn't a huge surprise. And that's a fairly standard kind of thing to promise when there's a little bit of economic debt. And during the Clinton era, we'll have a year, not the whole debt's wiped out, but a year when our budget is balanced, where we don't spend more than we take in. Yes. And there are a couple of years in there where we pay down the national debt. So he is a pretty fiscally balanced, fiscally responsible kind of guy. Now, Republicans will take some credit for that because they are going to also win the Congress in '94. But they do work together, which will be part of the legacy of Clinton. And you know the main legacy of Clinton, which he would be upset about because he would like for you to remember that we do some unusual things that are good during his presidency, especially fiscal things. We balance the budget for a year. We don't pay off the debt. I don't want to overstate it, but it is better than any president had done in a while before and certainly since. So raised taxes on the wealthy and expanded the earned income credits for people who are in the lower income ranges. So there's a goal there to kind of balance income levels in a responsible capitalist sort of way. Earned income tax credit. And he also lobbied for NAFTA, which started under the Bush administration, and certain people were opposed to, but he thought it would be a good idea. So lobbied for it and got the Congress on his side. They probably were anyway, but they signed that and passed it. And he also proposes universal health insurance. Universal health insurance. We'd heard about that before with Harry Truman, and you've heard about that since with President Obama. And probably part of the reason it failed is, one, we probably weren't ready for it. Two, he put his wife in charge of it. And as brilliant as she is, she's not terribly personable. And also, people saw her as kind of the unelected second vice president, maybe. And it was a complicated plan. And the Republicans had a pretty good plan or opposition plan against it. They don't propose anything. They just put on some really interesting commercials that made it seem like this wouldn't benefit the average person. So that doesn't go over very well. During his second year of the presidency, we have congressional elections. That happens every 2 years, and the Republicans take over the House with something called the Contract with America. And their new House Speaker, Newt Gingrich, who's an interesting fellow in his own right, a brilliant, not terribly moral dude sometimes. Oops. Excuse me. Is the head of the Contract with America, which is to balance the budget, term limits, harsher penalties on criminals and getting rid of welfare, which is kind of what we do during sort of. We transform, welfare to something called workfare. So you're required to have a job if you're on welfare. And while that may seem, like a logical thing to do, most of the people on welfare are young women who are a lot of single mothers. So if they go to work, then they have to pay for childcare. And yeah, it's really what we find out is it's kind of impractical for women to have jobs when they have to pay for daycare, because these are also usually women who had kids in their teens, and they aren't usually qualified for really high paying jobs, if you know what I'm saying. So they spend a lot of their money on the daycare. So we end up modifying this plan. He also does the 3 strikes and you're out plan during his presidency, which says that if you are convicted of 3 felonies, then you go to jail for life. And this is a time period where jail population expands dramatically. And this is sort of problematic for at least one current presidential candidate, the Joe Biden fellow, because he was strongly in favor of this. And this is disproportionately negative for people who are poor and people who are minorities, and there seems to be a lot of crossover in that, because one of the weird things that happens in the 90s is the people who make drug laws make harsher penalties for crack than they do for cocaine, which are 2 different forms of the same drug. But crack is more of an urban problem and cocaine is more of a wealthy people suburban problem. So possession of crack is a felony, while possession of cocaine had a lower penalty. So there were lots of people with a couple of 2 or 3 drug offenses that ended up with life sentences. And people saw that, rightly so, I think, as unfair. But again, your decision whether that's unfair. So prison sentence reform, 3 strikes and you're out, kind of popular at the time, but leads to a real boom in the prison population. And there may have been some lobbying by people who own private prisons. You should always look for lobbying when something expands that big, and does lead to the disproportionate imprisonment of poor people. All right, foreign policy, dang. Foreign policy is kind of a mess for Clinton. We're everywhere. The book doesn't do a real solid job on covering foreign policy. I think it's because it's not the thing we remember about Clinton, but he opens pretty early with finishing what Bush had gotten us into in Somalia. You probably have read or heard about that in Mogadishu. We lead a raid in October during Clinton's presidency. Bush sent the troops. Clinton's presidency is in charge of the raid, which is a failed raid and eventually leads to us getting out of Somalia. We also tend to ignore some other genocide in Africa and Rwanda. We do host the Oslo Accords, which gets Israel to recognize the Palestinians, the PLO, and to have better agreements with them, especially in the dual occupied states. We sponsor intervention in the Balkans, which is especially notable in Bosnia, where we go in to save a lot of, the UN and the United States send troops in to preserve the lives of people who are involved in ethnic cleansing. And there's also a conflict in the same area with Yugoslavia and Serbia, who attack the Albanians in Kosovo. And so we go there also to preserve the lives of those people. What's kind of notable about those things is they seem to be altruistic in some ways. There's no oil there, there's no economic benefit for us. And the people we are saving generally, are of Muslim background. But we did ignore similar problems in Africa and other places. And of course, we always ignore human rights issues in China. So it's a good thing that we go in, and seems altruistic, but it is a problem with our foreign policy in the modern era because we don't have a focus. I'm not sure that our focus on the Soviet Union before was that great, but we don't have a focus at all in the modern era, it seems like. So tricky stuff. But look over the foreign policy stuff. It's complicated. I think some of the online sources will give you better information. You notice how I didn't talk about impeachment? You notice that? Okay, let's talk about impeachment. So, your book talks about it a little. It's probably the one thing you know the most about Clinton, and it's the one thing Clinton's probably least happy about because it is the only thing that people remember from his presidency. And he would like for you to remember that the economy was good, we were at relative peace, the economy expands in a pretty dramatic way. Um, People's civil rights expand somewhat. He'd like for you to remember that, and he makes that Bader Ginsburg appointment is pretty historic. We like that a lot, mostly, sort of. But okay, impeachment. Clinton had a personal problem apparently, and that's that he liked to date. Unfortunately, he was married. And his wife wasn't a huge fan of the dating, but I think, like with the Roosevelt situation, she was aware of it. And again, not in favor, but it happened, and oops. Okay. So, the Ms. Lewinsky was a young woman. She was in her 20s. She may have been 20. And she had an internship at the White House. And it turned into a few romantic encounters. And she kept some evidence of those romantic, encounters. Now, Mr. Clinton had some issues apparently with dating when he worked in Arkansas, and there were records of those things. And a few of the women decided to sue him for sexual harassment while he was president. He asked for the courts to delay the lawsuit until his presidency ended because he's not going anywhere and they could get justice later. But the courts agreed to let the lawsuits continue. And the lawyers found out that Mr. Clinton continued dating as president and had some information and apparently some evidence about that. So when they deposed him, when they asked for his testimony under oath at the White House, they asked him about Monica Lewinsky, and he lied. Now, he ends up getting impeached not for dating, but because he lied under oath, which is a crime. And so the butterfly, sorry. So the House and Senate had to decide if that was worthy of impeachment. The House, which is a 2-year, they have 2-year terms, and they were dominated by new Republicans who are contract with America guys. They went, heck yeah, let's impeach the dude. And then when they went to the Senate and held the trial went, oh gosh, are we impeaching some guy for lying about an affair? And several of them probably had been in similar situations, just speculating. But they decided that lying about an affair was not a good enough reason to kick a president out of office. So they did censure him. Well, I don't think they officially censured him. What eventually happens is he settles the lawsuit. The women get a settlement, and he agrees to give up his license to practice law at the Supreme Court, which was unlikely to be something he was going to do later. All right, I'm going to stop now because I can't see the screen, and I have no idea how long I've gone on, and I don't know that I can stop this. So, oh, there's the stop thing. Okay, all right, so come out to the park, volunteer for the soccer league if you ever need volunteer hours, not a shameless promotion at all. All right, you guys have a good day.